Oh, sorry. That's a great start, isn't it? Okay, well, it'd be really easy to just pile on with the first question. I think you've been getting it a lot, but I'm a contrarian. So I thought I might ask you something that you might want from others. So starting with the idea that we're in a mess with democracy. Facebook is in a bit of a mess too, but it's bigger than Facebook. So you've kind of explained the bits that you're going to own and what you're doing in the speech. What is your ask of ministers, of intelligence agencies, of electoral authorities? Because I bet they haven't been perfect either. So what do you need from them to do the job that you've just promised in that speech?
Well, at the end of the day, you know, they're the folk who, in a democracy anyway, are the legitimate powers that be who set the rules for how our elections work. I mean, it isn't for a private company like Facebook, however big, to become a sort of surrogate for electoral commissions or electoral law or voter registration or, you know, and so on and so forth. And so I think, you know, I do want to stress, I've announced today, for instance, some really important and very granular new controls, the likes of which have never operated before on this scale, to make sure that people who pay for political ads or ads where maybe they're mischievously trying to stir the pot on emotive issues like immigration in the run-up to the European elections have to go through hoops that we have set. They've got to be authorized, they've got to be checked, they've got to have a disclaimer, and they'll then have their ads put in an archive for everyone to see.
But you like government to set more of the road rules.
Here's the point. That should be something that a company like Facebook is doing because the rules have been set by democratically elected governments in a union like the European Union. And I hope that gap in which that Facebook, in a sense, is now not, I mean, it was always a technological innovator, but Facebook is now a sort of policy innovator and almost a regulatory innovator. And I don't think that's a comfortable place for a private company to be. So I actually rather look forward to the day that, my ideal hope would be, let's say the stuff I've announced today, they're not perfect. It's not going to be the end of the story on how to manage the online phenomenon of online political advertising at election time. But I hope that governments and regulators will be able to use those tools to develop their own rules so that in future, instead of making up those rules ourselves, companies like Facebook are implementing and abiding by rules set by others.
And intelligence and security services, is there some kind of hotline when they identify some new group that is going to be explosive or violent or dangerous? Can they get on the phone to you and shut it down?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the first, as it happens, one of the first times I came across some of these big American tech companies in any detail, funny enough, was when I was a Deputy Prime Minister in the British government. Where, of course, as we all know, the intelligence authorities rely very heavily on telecoms companies, social media companies and others to cooperate under the rule of law and obviously all the rest of it. And this is a very important relationship. My experience, my sense is that relationship is stronger in some countries than it is in others. But, you know, I think, again, in the spirit of candor, you know, you mentioned 2016, in the 2016 US presidential election, where you hear lots of people now sort of assuming that everybody knew the Russians were interfering. No one knew at the time. The spooks didn't know. The government didn't know. The media didn't know. Facebook didn't know. You know,
but the real question is that you've got those lines of communications open now.
Yes.
We can learn from the past, but we shouldn't repeat it.
Yes, of course.
Now, on political ads, it's my understanding that you basically lose money on political advertising. I'd say that Facebook's lost reputation via its connection to political advertising. And there's obviously a free speech argument about allowing it. But my question is, wouldn't it be better to simply say, let's get out of it? We'll give up that little bit of money and we will clean up our reputation by being separate from that.
So you're right. There's no commercial incentive to. In fact, this whole machinery that I've talked about now is not. I mean, it might sound easy in a few lines in a speech, but there's a huge amount of complexity and expense behind it all in terms of human endeavor and the computing expertise associated with it. So there's no commercial incentive to do it. I mean, look, I think there are two things. I'll be very candid, one is a purely practical thing, because I have to say, when I arrived at Facebook, I had a sort of similar instinct. I said, let's just get out of this. I mean, it's a thankless task. Everyone either says you're doing too much or doing too little. You're either taking too much down or leaving too much up, or, But of course, if you were to block political ads, you'd need to develop a huge infrastructure to build those walls, and you need to define what you're keeping out.
But you're doing that anyway by asking people to identify themselves and be paid by an authorized
so what I mean is it's not a cost-free option to decide to exclude something, exclude something from the platform.
Luckily, you make billions of dollars a year.
Yeah, no, agreed. No, this is not a pounds and pence thing. No, the genuine, and we discussed this at length, Mark Zuckerberg and Cheryl were very involved in it, is exactly as you say, which is how can you claim that you are in favor of an open world, which is in a sense the guiding spirit of social media. It's all about people being able to say what they like, when they like, to whom they like, and connecting with each other and supporting causes they want and so on, and not being told what to think and do and so on. How can you do that and at the same time not allow people to use your platforms in a legitimate way to participate in and appeal to voters? So
it's kind of existential in a way. I mean, you are the greatest convening power on earth. You've created the biggest community that's ever existed. And I guess it gets down to, would Facebook ever accept a slightly narrower mission? I mean, bringing people together, you can come together for a lot of reasons. You can do discomforting, dangerous, or violent things when you come together. But maybe it's about being a bit narrower and a bit less philosophy.
Yeah, that's an interesting way you put it. So I think there is a narrowing going on already. So if you look at the huge volume of material and content which is now removed every day by Facebook because it contravenes the community standards on hate, violence, division, and so on, and the stuff that's coming down, I alluded earlier to the decision we took the week before last on these Russian-related pages and so on, the million, I mean, it's extraordinary, the million fake accounts which we take down before they're even registered every day. I think you could say actually that we're hardening, maybe the better way is we're hardening the parameters in which acceptable content is deemed to be legitimate. By the way, I think we've got a lot more work to do, for instance, on the thing that's come to light tragically in Britain in recent days about images of self-harm and so on. That's an area where I now strongly anticipate we will narrow the funnel. So I think in terms of the content, there has been a narrowing going on, but that has to be married, as you say, with a belief in the virtue, which is sometimes uncomfortable, because if you give people freedom, and if you hold up a mirror to humanity with 2.6 billion people on it, you see good stuff, you see bad stuff, you see beautiful stuff, you see tragic stuff, you see vile stuff, and you see wonderful stuff. That, of course you do. How you set the boundaries, I think a company like Facebook, my experience, is sincerely trying to grapple with it. But boy, is that something that you need also, particularly democratically elected governments, to play their role. And I hope what we can move beyond. At the moment, there's a lot of kind of finger waving and sort of, there's a lot of recriminations, and a lot of it, no doubt, has been elicited because of Facebook's own mistakes. But I really think we're only going to get out of this over the next 5 or 10 years and serve society at large if where those boundaries are set is a collaborative exercise.
And it gets a bit to the heart about how serious you are with that change of heart in regulation, where some of it must obviously be a little bit tactical in terms of survival, and then there's the genuine efforts that people in the company seem to be making around some of this stuff. I guess it also gets to that question of, are you just a platform or are you something else?
Yep.
Now, the journalists in the room or other people where I'm from might want you to say, look, we're a full-on publishing company. I'm not suggesting you go that far. But one analogy I'd bring up is a bit like with money laundering or dodgy money. You could call banks a platform, but actually the way regulation has changed in recent years is it's about know your customer. If there's dodgy money going through the bank still has some level of responsibility. How much do you think that way of thinking about regulation is getting embedded in Facebook? Is it just you guys on comms, or is it starting to move into engineering and other parts of the company? So
I think you're right to characterize it, like all these things, as a sort of journey which is evolving. So you're right. The early sort of, I hope I'm not being facetious here, the early slightly sort of, utopian, libertarian, all regulation is wrong kind of spirit that clearly prevailed in the early, heady days of the Silicon Valley boom.
Until about January 2018.
It's all giving way to something quite new. And I've certainly not, in my short time there, I haven't encountered anyone serious and thoughtful in Silicon Valley who thinks it's sort of sustainable to say that, it's a completely sort of hands-off approach, got no responsibility. And it's not, by the way, just comms people or people saying this. You can see it in the actions. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be employing 30, as they are now, 30,000 people to monitor and take down vast amounts of... I mean, by the way, I make a prediction. I make a prediction that the debate today, which is understandably is a lot about why do platforms like Facebook leave X, Y, Z up on the platform, might very easily topple into exactly those same people saying, why are you taking so much down? Because a huge amount is coming down. I think, oddly enough, it's almost the untold story. Because there's always a time lag between debates, solutions, and then kind of people catching up with changed realities. So I think Facebook clearly, by its actions, accepts that it doesn't have... Of course, it has a deep responsibility. The question is it the same responsibility as, let's say, an editor who can literally hand-pick what every adjective and adverb appears in her or his newspaper? Well, it clearly is not the same.
No. But that's part of about the velocity you created. It didn't happen. You built a system.
Well, hang on. It's scale, absolutely. Of course, vast scale. But crucially, it's because it is... The content is a voluntary act by individuals deciding how they want to express themselves and what they want to say to each other and how they want to connect with families and friends and da-da-da. I mean, that is not a controlled process, and nor indeed should it ever be. So clearly, it's lying somewhere between. I don't know what adjective or noun to apply to it, but it is clearly something which is well beyond that hands-off philosophy, but not analogous to a completely different way of producing information, which is a highly curated, centrally edited form of publication. Mm-hmm. It isn't. It's the whole point about social media, which is why it unsettles people, because it's raucous. It's unpredictable. It depends on what millions of people choose to do, and that's why some people don't like it. And then some people say, "Oh, I love the fact that Facebook, people organised a Me Too protest on Facebook," and they say, "Oh, but I hate the fact that on Facebook they organised Gilets Jaunes protest." You can't. That's the whole point. You can't control how people use those platforms to communicate with each other. So
but a bit about what you design now, going back to that point about the engineers. I think one of the reasons why you must have chosen to base yourself in Menlo Park is that that's the heart of the action. The engineers are gods. So what are you doing to bring engineer side and politically aware side of Facebook together so that you are on the same page and you're not caught out again?
When I fly back to California tomorrow, I look forward to telling my engineering friends that they are gods, in your view. They'll be delighted.
We'll bring them back. Actually, here's another question to add on to the pile. Would you consider doing things like bringing a bunch of them here to Brussels or go to Myanmar so they can see the real-world implications?
Well, they've done that, but I certainly Myanmar, of course, absolutely. But actually, funny enough, I strongly agree with you. I've already approached a number of the key engineers to say, look, because this is highly complex stuff. I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly. I've tried over the last few months to learn as much as I can sort of how it works under the bonnet. And some of it is astonishingly ingenious. Some of it is actually more mundane than you might expect. And I do think it would be very, very helpful, maybe after the European elections and after the European Commission has been formed, if decision makers here find it helpful, not just to hear from folk like me, but you're quite right, from folk who really are in the engine room, so that if and as, or rather when, new regulation is developed, people understand how it relates to the pistons and the levers in the engine room. Because I think sometimes, it's like ships passing in the night.
Now, one final question, maybe before we move to all of you guys. It's about this unifying of the data architecture, or the merging of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram data. Now, you and Cheryl have been on a tour, a bit of explaining, a bit of apologizing over the last week, and I think it was received fairly well in audiences in Davos. But then a lot of us wake up on Friday morning and we read a story in the New York Times, which makes people wonder why they weren't being told something like that in the meetings they had last week. And I mentioned it in my opening remarks, but a guy who's Tommaso Valetti, who is the chief competition economist here in Brussels, he essentially called you a bunch of liars. So what's your view on that? And doesn't he have a point? I mean, you did say you weren't going to do that when WhatsApp and Facebook merged a few years ago.
So I don't think any undertakings were taken when that case and that fine happened a few years ago. I don't think any undertakings were taken not to do what they called unified messaging. I don't know who this chap is, and I don't know why he thinks it's lying. I wonder whether I don't know how he can judge given that there's no
He
sort of fixed
advised on the
proposal.
he advised on the case.
Oh, on that case. Okay, well, that case was settled, as you know, then. Look, it's much, much more simple than some of that, dare I say it, slightly heated language suggests. What Mark Zuckerberg has said and what appeared in the New York Times is something that I bet you many of you say to your friends, which is that people are increasingly using lots of different messaging apps. You use WhatsApp, you use iMessage, you use Messenger, and so on. And it's an incredibly simple view that he has, that over time, people will want to be able to send messages from one messaging app to another. Literally, that's it. That's it. It is so early days. We haven't worked up how that would work, whether it's workable, what regulators may or may not think about it before they jump to any conclusions, what you'd need to do, pointing back now to the clever engineers that we're going to ship over in an aeroplane later this year to Brussels. You know, how you make that work in the kind of the data infrastructure. You know, how much data integration you need between them. All of those things. So I'm afraid I can't give you much more colour than simply to state what I just know to be true, having spoken to him about it, is that Mark Zuckerberg just personally thinks, firstly, that, as is evidence from the sort of figures, that private messaging is becoming increasingly popular, not exactly as an alternative, but certainly as a step.
Encryption is part of this.
Well,
I mean, I'll give you points for that. If it's all going to be encrypted, that is possibly a bonus.
Encryption poses challenges, particularly to do with law enforcement issues, but is a fantastic, of course, guarantee of privacy for people who use encrypted services. So his instinct is just really quite just a simple one, which is, look, over time, given that more and more people are using a plethora of messaging apps, and that Facebook has some, but by no means all of the leading messaging apps, we've got to find ways of making it easier for people to communicate across that. That's kind of it. And it hasn't got much further than that. Now as and when it does, or
I'm
if
going
and
to
when
save you for a second because the time gods
Right.
are very angry at us. So I'm going to actually switch it to questions. But if it becomes relevant, do continue. Who has a question? We've got the gentleman here in the front corner, and James Crisp from The Telegraph goes second, but that means it definitely must be a woman who goes third. And we'll take them one by one. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Lennart Koschwitz. I work with Allied for Startups, and my question is concerning startups. So you mentioned that Facebook is in many ways a poster child and also a policy innovator today. So I'm wondering what your recommendation would be to your colleagues at Facebook, but also to your former colleagues as policymakers. How can we make sure that these policy decisions that are making today are not making it harder for startups to enter the market and compete?
So I'm probably going to give you an unsatisfactorily generic response, and it's why I dwelt on it so much in the speech, because, and I'm sure, of course, not only am I sure, I know Facebook, not least because of mistakes that have happened in the past and may happen again in the future, has a heavy burden of responsibility in all of this. But I think we're at quite a pivotal moment, particularly in the European debate, about fundamental attitudes towards how we allow data to be used. Just to forget, let's imagine Facebook did not exist. You're running a startup, and like thousands of startups in the health sector, for instance, we know now for a fact that the most remarkable advances in health technologies, from nanotechnologies to genetic innovations, will heavily rely on data. Now, that data can be anonymized and so on, but it requires a regulatory framework, a legal framework, and crucially a social permissiveness to allow people's data to be used for innovative research and exploration and so on. And I guess my message is that sort of data-rich companies like Facebook need to show their responsibilities, clearly better than they've managed to persuade people so far. But on the other side of the equation, regulators need to be really mindful that they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because if in responding to legitimate concerns about data, you make it just so difficult for data to be shared, to be pooled, to be aggregated, to be examined, and so on, we really will, I say this as a European, we will deprive ourselves of some extraordinary innovations, not least from startups, many of which haven't even invented yet.
James Crisp up the back there.
Hello, Mr. Clegg. It's James Crisp from the Daily Telegraph. I'll make this as quick as possible. You currently work for Facebook, which a lot of people in Brussels blame or take solace in the idea that Facebook was responsible for the Brexit vote. Previously, you worked with David Cameron and put him into government, and some people would say on the path towards the Brexit referendum. So my question is, do you ever worry that you are a Brexit enabler? And secondly, what exactly is the going rate for a deputy prime minister these days? Thank you.
No, I don't. Next question.
It's a female that I'm going to be looking for. Don't make me do this where we have an awkward silence. You all have great brains, and there are great questions in them. Don't give it all up to the men. Anne Mettler up the back from the European Commission's think tank.
Yeah, hello, thank you for the opportunity. So my question is about anticipation and foresight, because it's so clear that the big tech companies sort of missed the first wave of misuse of technology, where you say, no one saw it and we just didn't know, and fine. But my question now is, what do you see ahead? What are you worried about? What are you preparing for? Because part of the problem, why it's so hard for public policy to respond, is because we just don't know. You say we take down 1 million accounts a day. How do we know that that's actually good? Maybe there are 1.5 million accounts that are being fake accounts that are being created. And I think this is part of the frustration. I say it really as a friend. I mean, we need you because we don't know. We don't have the insights, and it's very difficult to regulate something that you're just learning about from the news, you know, and the next scandal and drip, 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 and, you know, so it's very, very difficult is what I'm trying to say. So help us to anticipate better. Stress test your own assumptions about what is really an innovation but could potentially be completely misused. So what do you see ahead? What are you preparing for? Thank you.
So look, on your general point about the difficulty of, you know, predicting, self-evidently, future prediction is a tricky business, but especially, as you alluded, when you've got this really difficult interaction between fast-evolving technology, malign attempts to use that technology for bad ends, and a sort of confused sort of mess of different jurisdictional responsibilities. And frankly, I say this as a politician who's now working in a tech company, kind of just different languages. I mean, one of the things I'm discovering from these gods, they kind of speak, you know, these engineers, they speak kind of almost a different language. And it's taken me some time to literally try and translate into my own slightly more primitive language what they mean. So first, a genuine offer to you. If you think there is a way in which we could structure a relationship with you and your colleagues in the European Commission, I would suggest not just with Facebook, but maybe with some of the other very big tech companies, where there's a constant channel where you feel you can ask those questions so that we can give you detailed answers, as you say, not just sort of generic ones, and certainly not ones just permeated or refracted through often the somewhat, you know, not entirely straightforward filter of the mainstream press. Honestly, I would make it a personal undertaking to try and establish something like that. And I hope you and your colleagues would always feel free to come to Silicon Valley, speak to some of the folk who are really working at the sharp end so that they can explain in human terms as much as possible. And I come and join you for my education as much as possible. On the worries, look, again, I don't, not least because I'm quite new to this job, I don't want to pretend that my worries are any more insightful than anybody else's. But I do worry a lot that there are now technologies, what is called in the jargon deep fake, where it is basically impossible to distinguish whether a politician, a computer-generated politician, is the real person or not. And I've seen there's a very advanced startup in London which is at the cutting edge of this, and I've seen them. I saw them. They produced 2 videos of Donald Trump, which I saw. It was impossible to distinguish between one and the other. And we're doing a lot of work, as you can imagine, to already try and work out what our defenses against that would be, what kind of machine learning would you need, what tools would you need to identify it. But that is a very worrying new frontier where reality and fiction just bleed almost imperceptibly into each other. So that worries me. And So that's one obvious worry, and that's an obvious worry where, you know, I don't think anyone should hide the fact that no one's got perfect answers yet.
I'll do a quick follow-up to that there. Maybe something that's a little bit easier but no less distressing to identify. Do you ever have things like the equivalent of fire drills in the organization? You know, one ethnic group has tried to incite violence against another. Like, is there a tabletop exercise where we can figure out how long it will take for a red flag to get to Nick Clegg's desk before action can happen?
So again, these are all quite recent innovations, not least because of the terrible events in countries like Myanmar, where clearly Facebook just wasn't acting anywhere near a way which is commensurate with its responsibilities. What we've established, it's called internally, it's just internal jargon, critical countries, but to you or I, it means countries which are particularly vulnerable to violence and conflict and vulnerable and fragile states. We have now literally just scoured the world for those countries where we think things that might appear on our platform could cascade very quickly to real-world harm and violence. And we now, every week, Sheryl Sandberg chairs a meeting where myself and others, we sit around, we go through each of these countries to see where there are vulnerabilities based on reports of what's appearing on the platform. So I do think, as an organization, it's getting better and better, as you say, to set up these tripwires to anticipate problems before they arise. But it's a very imperfect science. You know.
Now, I did see another hand. Sorry, I'll take you, sir, here at the front.
Hi, Oliver Grimm with the Austrian newspaper Die Presse here. Which are these critical countries, or which of these countries you just mentioned show up most often? And then secondly, are you worried by the fact that right-wing to fascist parties in many countries around Europe, but also around the world, have made Facebook their medium de rigueur? If you look at Le Pen, if you look at Strache in Austria, the AfD in Germany, Salvini and so forth, Orban, Bolsonaro and so forth, they use Facebook in order to whip up people and to sort of spread their messages, which are very often not only not truthful, but actually hate speech. What do you do against that? And it's particularly the right-wing to fascist political movements that do that.
Yeah.
What does that tell about Facebook?
Well, just on the latter point, where any politician or political campaigner, or indeed anybody, indulges in hate speech, particularly where it incites violence and division in a way that which contravenes our community standards, or most importantly, if it contravenes the law of the land, that content will be taken down, and it is in huge quantities. And by the way, it's not just from the right. You'll also get extreme left-wing polemic which topples into hate speech. But I cannot stress enough, there is a huge difference between taking down hate speech and just taking down the content from politicians you don't like. And that is not the job of Facebook. It's not the job of Facebook. So, for instance, you may have read, when was it, towards the end of last year, my old friend Guy Verhofstadt was very upset because someone in Budapest, I think on behalf of Viktor Orban's party, took a clip from a speech he gave about immigration and then made some sort of wild assertions about it. And Guy wanted that taken down. And we said, no, we can't take that down. If we start getting to the business of taking down stuff that politicians say about each other, and having been in politics for 20 years, guess what? Politicians say really unpleasant things about each other, particularly at election time. And they make wild accusations and wild exaggerations about each other. I think it's really important that Facebook does not become an arbiter of what is politically acceptable speech beyond the obvious cases of hate speech and illegal speech. If we were to do that, we would be arrogating to ourselves a role which, quite rightly, you would deem to be completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. So I say again, Facebook must be put under constant scrutiny and pressure to take down content where it's not been fast enough to do so. But I hope people will also understand that Facebook wouldn't be providing the freedom that those platforms offer if it didn't also accept that with freedom, yes, comes, with freedom to speak comes the freedom to offend. It's one of the founding principles of an open democracy, and that's something that we very much believe in, and that's the way we try and make these decisions. On the what was the other? I can provide you with a list if you like, but it's quite an extensive list.
can stick it on the Facebook Brussels page. That will be nice. The time gods are trying to kill us again. I'm going to squeeze in one last question because it's very different to some of the other ones. And it's what you might be doing, or what are you doing, to keep Facebook staff on board with your current transformation? And I make the point for two reasons. One, I'm a user who tried to see, could I go without Facebook in January for my New Year's resolution? It's very difficult. I'm not even allowed to delete Messenger unless I want to give up the whole account. And Mark Zuckerberg obviously is in a position of great control inside the company. So people who want to express backlash or protest, limited room for maneuver there, but it's much harder to keep staff on board. And we've seen Google face protests within their organization about some decisions they've made. So what are you doing to make sure staff aren't the tipping point against you?
I'm not. I don't think there's a. It doesn't feel to me anyway when I work in the shiny offices in Menlo Park as if there's a sort of insurrection brewing. I must say, it doesn't feel like that at all. But I think, of course, a lot of people. I think people. I mean, look, employees are human beings, and they read a lot of the controversy swirling around Facebook, and some of them find that tough. And you know, they wouldn't be human if they didn't. I just think the key thing is that people should feel internally, but much more importantly externally, that however much criticism may sometimes be legitimately aimed at Facebook, there are now, and one can argue whether they should have started earlier, perhaps they should, but there are now very concerted attempts to try and match the commercial and technical success of Facebook with the duties and responsibilities that come with that success. And I hope, through actions, not through words, not through speeches, but through actions, that better balance between sort of freedom and responsibility will be better demonstrated. And I think that would be something which employees, as much as people outside Facebook, would appreciate.
Nick Clegg, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.